Hello everybody, it's Vertical Sandwich. Welcome to Book Reviews. So, today we're doing this, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So, this won a Retro Hugo, for 1954. It beat Childhood End. Retro Hugos were awarded, like, in later years, so, like, I think this one was in, like, 2004. There's, like, a really tiny bug flying in front of my face. But the rule for Retro Hugos is they have to be issued for years that no Hugo Award was given. And so, so this got one of them. And they're weird things, like, I'm trying to think, The Sword in the Stone, I think, won a Retro Hugo for, like, the 30s. And it's, like, really weird that, like, you know, an award that was instituted in the mid-50s would give awards for books that were written 20 years previous. But it does. They did. And this one won for 1954, I think. So, and beat Childhood's End, which is a great novel. So, Fahrenheit 451, you've probably heard of it. It was it's a very famous book. It's an often required for school reading book. It sometimes makes banned book lists. And, Fahrenheit 451 is approximately the temperature that paper auto-ignites, although there's actually a range depending on what kind of paper. But, like, the meaning of this, Fahrenheit 451, is that if you heat paper up to 451 degrees, it starts on fire. So, let's read a bit, and then we'll talk about kind of the overarching plot of the novel, how the novel reads, what's important about the novel, what I like about the novel, what I don't like about the novel, if there are don't likes, because I don't plan on what I'm going to say. I read the book and then I come out here and I do this. Toast popped out of the silver toaster. This is the night after, in the previous night, his wife has tried to kill herself by overdosing on pills, and he called some guys who aren't even EMTs, and they just showed up and pumped her stomach and, like, put new blood in her, and were like, thanks, take care, and, like, we do 10 of these a night, 15 of these a night. Like, off they went. It's great. Toast popped out of the silver toaster, was seized by a spidery metal hand that drenched it with melted butter. Mildred watched the toast delivered to her plate. She had both ears plugged with electronic bees that were humming the hour away. She looked up suddenly, saw him, and nodded. I should say, by the way, our main character, his name is Guy, and he is a fireman. And in this future, firemen go around and burn books. That is their job. Books are illegal. They burn books. You all right? He asked. She was an expert at lip reading from 10 years of apprenticeship at Seashell Ear Thimbles. She nodded again. She set the toaster clicking away at another piece of bread. Montag sat down. His wife said, I don't know why I should be so hungry. I'm hungry. Last night, he began. Didn't sleep well. Feel terrible, she said. God, I'm hungry. I can't figure it. Last night, he said again. She watched his lips casually. What about last night? Don't you remember? What, did we have a wild party or something? Feel like I have a hangover. God, I'm hungry. Who was here? A few people, he said. That's what I thought. She chewed her toast. Sore stomach, but I'm hungry as all get out. Hope I didn't do anything foolish at the party. No, he said quietly. The toaster spidered out a piece of buttered bread for him. He held it in his hand, feeling obligated. You don't look so hot yourself, said his wife. In the late afternoon it rained, and the entire world was dark gray. He stood in the hall of his house, putting on his badge with the orange salamander burning across it. He stood looking up at the air conditioning vent in the hall for a long time. His wife in the TV parlor paused long enough from reading her script to glance up. Hey, she said, the man's thinking. Yes, he said, I wanted to talk to you. He paused. You took all the pills in your bottle last night. Oh, I wouldn't do that, she said, surprised. The bottle was empty. I wouldn't do a thing like that. Why would I do a thing like that? She said. Maybe you took 2 pills and forgot, and took 2 more, and forgot again, and took 2 more, and were so dopey you kept right on until you had 30 or 40 of them in you. Heck, she said, what would I want to go and do a silly thing like that for? I don't know, he said. She was quite obviously waiting for him to go. "I didn't do that," she said. "Never in a billion years." "All right, if you say so," he said. "That's what the lady said." She turned back to her script. "What's on this afternoon?" he asked tiredly. She didn't look up from the script again. "Well, this is a play. Comes on the wall-to-wall circuit in 10 minutes. They mailed me my part this morning. I sent in some box tops. They write the script with one part missing. It's a new idea. The homemaker, that's me, is the missing part. When it comes time for the missing lines, they all look at me out of the 3 walls and I say the line. Here, for instance, the man says, 'What do you think of this whole idea, Helen?' And he looks at me, sitting here center stage, see? And I say, she paused and ran her finger under a line on the script. 'I think that's fine.' And then they go on with the play until he says, 'Do you agree to that, Helen?' And I say, 'I sure do. Isn't that fun, Guy?' He stood in the hall looking at her. 'It's sure fun,' she said. 'What's the play about?' 'I just told you. There are these people named Bob and Ruth and Helen.' 'Oh. It's really fun. It'll be even more fun when we can afford to have the 4th wall installed. How long do you figure before we save up and get the 4th wall torn out and a 4th wall TV put in? It's only $2,000. That's 1/3 of my yearly pay.' 'It's only $2,000, she replied. 'And I should think you'd consider me sometimes. If we had a 4th wall, why, it'd be just like this room wasn't ours at all, but all kinds of exotic people's rooms. We could do without a few things. We've already doing without a few things to pay for the 3rd wall. It was put in only 2 months ago, remember?' 'Is that all it was?' She sat looking at him for a long moment. 'Well, goodbye, dear.' 'Goodbye,' he said. He stopped and turned around. 'Does it have a happy ending?' 'I haven't read that far.' He walked over, read the last page, nodded, folded the script, and handed it back to her. He walked out of the house into the rain. Now, giant wall TVs, sound buds in your ears all the time. Ray Bradbury was not predicting the future. He was adamant about that. He said he was a future denier or a future diverter or something, that like he was trying to warn people about the bad things that could happen. But here's a thing that is important for Bradbury, and I know we haven't talked about Bradbury yet. Bradbury is an interesting kind of science fiction note in science fiction history. He's not a Clarke. He's not an Asimov. He didn't become he did become famous in the era of magazine science fiction like those guys. But those guys became kind of genuinely famous for scientific ideas, whereas Bradbury became famous for this scientific idea, for this idea. And this is unusual because Asimov and Clarke become famous for kind of normal science fiction, whereas this is dystopia. Like, this is just, hardcore, just 1984, Brave New World, boom, boom, like Fahrenheit 451. Now, there are some things about Fahrenheit 451 that I really love. There are some things that haunted me from my first reading, because my first reading was like in junior high school. And there are some things that I remember, like people talking about presidential candidates, about how attractive one was and how ugly the other one was, and how they could even run a person that ugly and expect people to vote for them. And I just kind of went like, man, like, seriously, coming out of 1954, like, you really... Kennedy-Nixon debate was coming up in less than 10 years. So, yeah, it's... Bradbury, obviously, again, I think I said this earlier, or maybe I said this on an LP, where I said that I think that science fiction informs technology instead of predicting it. I think that flip-up cell phones look like Star Trek communicators because Star Trek communicators look the way they did, not the other way around. Like, it was a good idea then, so that when somebody wanted to make a compact cell phone, they were like, oh, well, this is like a solid idea. I don't necessarily think that the two things are related. Correlation is not causation. And even if it is, I mean, again, I think that. So I think I think when science fiction seems to predict the future more often, it's driving the future. Now, that being said, there were things that Bradbury cared deeply about, but probably none so personally as this, right? And if you read the Martian Chronicles, there actually is this thematically is done, I feel, in a far more personal way. And I'll kind of give you the layout. The idea is that in a future where there's like a censorship bureau that burns books, a guy builds like the House of Usher or whatever from Edgar Allan Poe, and puts a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe stuff in there, knowing the censorship committee will come with like people to break it down and destroy it. And he invites them in and he kills them one by one using these Edgar Allan Poe things. And the last guy, as he's sealing them up in the wall, as in Cast of Amontillado, he's just yelling at him. He's like, you would have known what I was doing if you had read the books rather than burned them. And I just, like, that as a moment in fiction, it just amazes me. It just amazes me, where he's just like, you would have been prepared. Like, I wouldn't have been able to murder you all. Like, it's really good. It's super good. And, like you can tell, that for Bradbury, the idea of censorship is a terrifying thing. That the idea that people might look at this and go, that is a thing to be despised, is something that he finds okay. What he doesn't understand, what terrifies him is the idea that people would look at this and be like, this is a thing that needs to be removed from our reality. Obviously, so 54, we've seen an era of Nazi book burning at this point, right? Like, we've seen what a fascist government can do to try to limit information, and make kind of scapegoats of ideologies and ideas. And that is a thing that Bradbury is very passionate about. And I would argue that the majority of people should be passionate about, is that, you know, we should remember that the things that the agents of action in our world are not ideas. And that ideas are ideas. And that they don't necessarily have the kind of weight of, you know, good and evil until we've placed action to them. And so, like, you may not want to read Fahrenheit 451 and you may not like it. But Bradbury deserves his voice, right? And it's nice that this is out there for people to pick up and say, like, I mean, the whole thing I'm doing with this book review thing is impossible in Bradbury's future, right? And that goes for the Turner Diaries and Mein Kampf and the Satanic Diaries and, you know, down to like the Bible and the Quran and stuff. And that was one of the things, is this makes it to banned burned lists very often because the Bible is a book. And so this guy at one point, this fireman finds a Bible and he's talking about it, and he says to this guy, he's like, how many of these are there in like the Western Hemisphere? And he's like, none. He's like, officially there are none. And obviously, like, I mean, I'm not saying that only Christians ban books. I'm just saying that people, you know, it's one of the things that's controversial about this book. Now, I think you should read every banned book. I think if anybody bans a book, the first thing you should do is read it. That's who I am. Like, I don't think that we should shield ourselves from information. I think that we should trust ourselves and the people around us to make the best use of the information that is provided to them. Now, that being said, I mean, I know that Bradbury does a really good job with Fahrenheit 451. If you had to read Fahrenheit 451 in like junior high school or high school, first off, kudos to your junior high school or your high school, because like, this is a great book to make people read. Second, I think you should reread it as an adult, because there were a lot of things that I had missed or I'd forgotten about And so rereading it over 20 years later, I was shocked by kind of the layout of the book. It's super fast-paced. It's super short. I think it was originally published in a magazine. I think it might have originally been published in Playboy magazine, but I'm not sure about that. You can check that out. If so, it would have had to be pretty early in the existence of Playboy magazine. But so it's not a long book, but it's a super important book. And if you took my advice and you read 1984, you will see a ton of similarity, right? It precedes this book by less than a decade, and you kind of check that out. And then 1984 and this is one of the things that eventually we're going to have to talk about. Like, eventually, we're going to have to go back to, like, the Iron Heel and We and Brave New World and start talking about dystopic fiction, because I know that, like, Fahrenheit 451 clearly is influenced by 1984. 1984, by its author's own admission, was influenced by We. Brave New World, Orwell, like, Huxley claimed We did not influence him, and Orwell thought he was a liar. And Player Piano by Vonnegut is then ripped off of these things, and so they all kind of go back. But so We is kind of, like, you could argue that the Russian novel We is kind of the bud that germinates into modern dystopic literature, but Jack London's The Iron Heel precedes them all, and I haven't read it. So, so for dystopic novels, this is a classic. For 1950 science fiction, it actually reads as kind of a modern science fiction novel. It's very quick. You can read it in 2 days. I think that you probably should. And I think that, in general, like I said, anytime you see that somebody has tried to ban a book from any kind of organization, I think you should read that book. I think you'll learn a lot about the book. I think you'll learn a lot about people. Like, if you want to know, if you want to know what an organization truly stands for, it's as worth it to find out what they oppose. Like, and so we should read banned books about books being banned. Or maybe not. But I think that this book is fantastic. And I think the things Bradbury is trying to say, he's very passionate about. And again, I happen to share Bradbury's passion. I want information out there. I don't think that a book should ever be burned because of its content. I don't think a piece of literature should ever be burned because of its content. Because I just thought about, like, what the worst kind of things could be, and instantly went to kind of like illegal child exploitation, and was just like, oh no, that's gotta go. Like, but those clearly would be pictures in media like that. That being said, yes, I don't think that we should ever consider ideas so dangerous that they need to be taken out of the hands of, and they need to be removed from the scope of our freedom. Like, we should have a freedom to read the Turner Diaries, or Mein Kampf, or the Communist Manifesto, or the Satanic Verses, or the Holy Bible, or the Quran, or the Tao Te Ching, or that is the nature of, like, it is one of the things that makes being a human, colorful and adventurous and wonderful, is the idea that we can pick up something that we might horrifically disagree with and look into it, and I would argue that if you have convictions, and you should, and that you're afraid to view information that challenges them, then you don't really have convictions at all. So, with that in mind, I think Fahrenheit 451 is an important, like, starting point to think about the way we treat information, and the way that we judge it, and what we want to do with that information. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Because if you don't believe that the world can if you don't believe that your own convictions can stand up to contrary evidence, then you don't have any faith in them. And you really haven't done your due diligence. I guess you can disagree with me. You're entitled to your own opinion. Like, that's what this is all about. So, Fahrenheit 451. Again, I think it's important. I think it's an important book. I think it's a super important book. And it's a good book. It's a genuinely good book. That's the thing I didn't say. It's actually a genuinely good story. It's a lot of fun. Like, and doesn't do a lot of the things that, like, Brave New World and 1984 do, even though it kind of shares a familial relationship with them. Like, it decides to go kind of different directions. And I think they're worth reading. So yeah, Fahrenheit 451. It's unspeakably a classic and super, super good. And it's important for making book reviewers rant and rant and rant about censorship. Which, yeah. So, read a banned book. Read Fahrenheit 451. Enjoy Ray Bradbury. And agree or disagree with him. It's okay either way, actually. It is. Bye, everybody.